Okay. I think I'm recording now, Joe, so you can keep going.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you very much, everybody, for giving up your precious spare time when I realised you could be hoovering or changing the bedding or cleaning the bathroom and all of those interesting things that you get to do during lockdown when you can't do anything else. And thank you very much to the Thames Valley Regional Group for inviting me to give a presentation. They must have caught me at a good moment. So it's been an interesting journey actually putting this presentation together, trying to pull some thoughts together. So there's been the introduction. So I think Vicky has already gone through all of that, and sort of the day job involves for CGL most or many of these sort of various things that make up what I do. But you know, we've come here to do a little bit of crystal ball gazing. You know, what is there in the future? Where have we come from? You know, where do we think we're going to be going? And you know, what are the twists and turns on the journey? I think possibly by the end of it, I may have more questions than answers. But I suppose if it gets the old grey matter working, then that's part of the purpose of these talks. So I have listed the topics. It's there, but I'm not going to read them all out because we'll go through them sort of roughly in order, and we'll see what we come up with. And so the first thing that came up on the list was, you know, the sustainability and net carbon zero. I think we have to recognise that climate change is happening. That you know, the UK government has brought in legislation that says that we are committed to a net carbon zero country by 2050, which although 25 years or you know 30 years sounds quite a long time, in terms of what we have to do to get there, I think it's going to go in a blink of an eye. Sadly, it's probably not going to be something I'm going to be hugely involved in, certainly at the sharp end. At least I don't think so. I think I'll probably be pushing up daisies by that point, but if we don't start doing things now and don't start changing how we think about how we do things and how we manage contaminated land within that framework, then you know, we're not going to be part of the journey and we're going to miss the boat. So you know, where do we start with it? You know, we need to measure where we're at. We need to know where we're going. So we should be taking a whole life cycle approach, you know, from design through to maintenance, and you know what happens afterwards. I don't know the whole answers to these. These are thoughts that are running through my head, but certainly our attitudes and methodologies are going to have to change or adapt. And there are tools out there, the carbon footprinting tools, like you know PAS 2060 and the carbon trust certification. So certainly things that you can look at. There are sustainability tools that we can look at, certainly if we're thinking in terms of construction or waste management or designing remediation. So we can look at the overarching requirements, the UN sustainability goals, and there's 17 of those. A lot of the goals in there are social. So they might not be, and they're certainly not all applicable to contaminated land work, but there are some that are. Things about protecting the water environment. There's the Surf UK framework. That's been around quite a while, but in recent times, they have published the supplementary reports 1 and 2, which has updated that framework. And that's something I think we will see coming more and more forwards with remediation designs. And we should be certainly beginning to think that way. I also saw that a post not recently about the climate impacts risk assessment methodology that the MOD's put together, which potentially is there to adapt about how climate change and the hazards associated with it we might be able to assess them as the impacts on construction and the impacts on sites that we may be looking to redevelop. So, I mean, we are at the start of really of the carbon zero journey of how we manage climate change. It's a bandwagon we need to jump onto, and we need to start sort of pedaling very hard, I think. We're all on that learning curve. Our challenge is to make sure we've got the right tools, we've got the right infrastructure, and that we use to the best of our ability the technologies that we've got, and drive that change. I understand that the AGS is planning to do a webinar specifically on the journey to carbon zero for geoenvironmental specialists. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they have to say on that one. So the next topic I've got is emerging contaminants. Historically, what we've always done and what we still do is we use our professional judgment. We'll look at the desk study for a site. We'll try and work out the history, what potential contaminants there are in the site, and we'll come up with some sort of list or suite of contaminant testing, which is usually based on the historical uses and things that might have happened on the site. And that's worked for us well up to now. We've used things like the DOE industry profiles. They may be slightly aged, but they still tell us what might be there. But there are other challenges that are coming. You know, the way man has used the environment and used the world around it, we've not done very well. We've brought in quite a lot of anthropogenic contaminants that aren't necessarily associated with particular industrial processes. The Environment Agency has already identified, you know, drugs and various different pesticides and things that are now currently present a lot of the time in our groundwater, and they're coming from typical household and personal care and hygiene products. So we're now seeing things, and worldwide it's been recognized that there are contaminants like I've listed there that are now present in the general water environment. So without intending it to, you know, we've now put things like pharmaceuticals into our water supply. Problem is that we don't necessarily know how bad they're going to be for us. You know, two sets of the contaminants that, you know, spring to mind are, you know, the PFOS PFOA family. You know, we know that these are bioaccumulative and toxic, and, you know, they are banned in certain ways, but they are still there present, and we know they're toxic. And potentially we're going to have to be starting to look for them maybe a little more often, rather than just on those sites where we think it was used by the fire brigade potentially, which historically was how I've assessed it, but it might be more widespread than that. You know, microplastics, we've seen all the pictures of, you know, dolphins with plastic rings around their noses, and, you know, fishes wrapped in cling film in the oceans. And that's sort of the macro plastics, if you like, but they do break down in the environment and they become secondary microplastics. And as well as those, we have the primary microplastics, which are the beads that we're finding all these personal care products and plastic pellets. And they are almost endemic in the water, in the soil, and in the world that we live in. I suppose for me, the big question is, you know, do we need to start looking for them? However, in the little searching I've been done, nobody seems to know really what impact these microplastics are likely to have in the long term. I don't know. Like I say, more questions than answers, but certainly something to be thinking about. You know, are we at our historical lists of industrial chemicals? Are they the way that we need to be thinking about contamination as we move forward into the next decades and beyond? The other thing I was thinking about, being the archetypal Luddite, to those of you that know me, you know, we have, you know, the digital world. It's a very frightening place for the some things of my generation, unless you happen to like hitting buttons a lot. But we're seeing models all the time, you know, these digital and virtual models. And this is the way things are going to be moving forwards. The data that we collect is going to have to be collected in a digital format so that it links in with everybody else's digital platforms. I don't think we can stand separate from that. We're going to have to evolve into that digital world, probably a lot more than we already are. And I think once we get on that roll, it's going to happen very quickly. I did particularly like this one, I apologize. But I'm afraid the Luddites, like this gentleman, are no longer. We can't have them. We're going to have to move forward. We're going to have to embrace digital and take it forwards. And there are lots of ways that, as you can just see, that we can do that. Other things are that concern me, or something that I think about occasionally, are things that I wonder what is coming next, a little bit of horizon gazing. We have moving goalposts. The contaminated land family is not sitting still. It can't sit still. The world is evolving. Guidance is also evolving, is going to continue to do so. We've seen the recent launch of the Land Contamination Risk Management website on gov.uk. It's replacing CLR 11, which for so long was a kind of Bible or roadmap to the contaminated land assessment and the processes to get through options appraisals and remediation design and validation verification. That's now been put onto the environment, by the Environment Agency, onto the gov.uk website. Sadly, it doesn't now have the very useful flowcharts. So you might have to go back to your old copy of CLR 11 if that's what you're using, although CLR 11 sadly has been withdrawn. So we're moving forwards into, if you like, a digital platform for LCRM that's available and accessible to globally and to, to anybody that can access a computer. We've seen, I think it was launched at the Silk conference last year, which happened just before lockdown kicked in. Some new guidance on comparing contamination data with critical concentrations. Basically, another way of thinking about statistical analysis. I'm not a statistician. I would never claim to be. I mean, I have read some of this guidance and it's very clever, but I'm not sure how practical it's going to be for most of us doing contaminated land investigations. And I'm not saying I don't agree with the process, but the limitations on it mean that if you're doing targeted investigation and if you're targeting different layers of soil and various other things that are pretty much standard practice when we are in planning an investigation, basically make this method of statistical analysis invalid. So I think if you have a big site with a grid, with all your samples at the same sort of data, same sort of level. Sorry about that, I don't know whether you can see it, but I'll try and get rid of it. If you have all your data at the same level and you haven't targeted it to areas where you think there might be contamination, then with a broad brush, this doesn't apply. And I'm sure there may be ways that it can be used with excluding that data, but just to be aware, there are quite a number of limitations on it. I've added the next one, risk and reliability and gas protection data, the 2019 update. I realise it's not new. However, I'm not sure the uptake on using it has been very much yet. And I think that's maybe something we need to be looking at moving forwards. So going beyond calculating SGVs based on gas flow out, estimated gas flow out of a borehole and the gas concentration, and taking account of the ground gas and the soil permeability. I think the baseline and the premise of that approach is that you can have a reservoir of gas in the ground, but it's not necessarily going to be indicative of there being a risk unless there's some sort of advective driver pushing it through the soil. We have a very almost fail-safe approach with the approach we're using at the moment from current guidance, and I don't think this yet hasn't been written into any of the British standards, but certainly something to look at going forwards. I mean, there's also guidance now on gas emissions from mine workings, which is drafted and I guess it will be imminent, so there will be even more sort of useful information on gas protection coming forwards, you know, as I speak. I also just like to point out that, you know, we have a wonderful library of things like British standards. They are a moving goalpost. They are a moving feast. They're updated, and there's always various standards that come out for review or comment. Currently, there is this 24212, which is remediation techniques, which is out as a draft for comment. So we as an industry, we do have the chance to feed back into these documents. If we want to make a change or want to have an input, then, you know, we need to take the opportunity that we get. And the ground forum has part of its remit is it reviews what is coming out through the standards, and you can find that through the Clare website. Suitable qualifications. I mean, this is something that's been around for a long time. I mean, what is a suitable qualification? And there is slightly different guidance for various things. The first quote there about competent persons, that's come from the National Planning Policy Framework, and that says that a person has to be qualified. You know, as you move through into the guidance that's put forward in the LCRM, and I apologise, that is not my mistake. That is a direct copy. The specialist in land contamination, the specialist in land condition, is a copy, not mine. But there are lots and lots of different qualifications that are arriving. So although we have Silk, which I have to promote, you know, obviously it's a great thing. There are other qualifications through being chartered professionals, the RoJEP. I saw recently in the last week that the registered environmental practitioner was coming out, which is a sort of lower level for non-chartered but degree qualified professionals, qualified persons dealing with waste, you know, SQPs dealing with being able to sign off quality reports, and also the other recent accreditation that's come out, which is to do with gas protection verification, either as a specialist or a technician. So there are lots and lots of different qualifications. I think the important bit is to be professional about it. You know, have you got the right experience? Have you got the right understanding? Are you being professional and not stepping outside your own professional abilities and understanding? And if you are, then you shouldn't be taking on that work. But maybe that is a way to direct your own professional development and training so that you can become one of these people or acquire these accreditations to become suitably qualified. I mean, there isn't anything that I've seen that's actually cast in stone. So it is a rather open-ended question. New technologies. And I thought I rather like this one. And I thought it was going to have a really good impact that tomorrow the retrofitting ground gas protection measures was coming out. And they've rather pissed on my bonfire a little bit, and by issuing it today. So the joke didn't really work, but it is new guidance. It's some new thinking. I haven't read it yet because obviously it's only come out today. But it's pulling together thoughts and new guidance to help us unravel things that we're trying to do as we move forward. And I think this ties back into the sustainability of things. You know, you don't want to rip things out unless you have to. So you want to find ways of being able to keep existing structures and do retrofitting where it's applicable and where it's necessary. And trip hazards. You know, the things that come up every day that you think, oh God, I wish I'd known about that, or oh, nobody told me about that one. So we've got new and revised standards. So and I just pulled out there, you know, EH40, the fourth edition. You know, that's come out in the last few months. If you're doing assessments where you're looking at human health risk assessment and you want to know about the exposure limits, you know, we've all recognised Brexit. It's happened. Yay! Whichever side you want to sit on. But our waste classifications are based on European waste classifications and European waste framework directives. Currently, that's just been transferred into UK legislation. How do we move on from that? You know, will we evolve it differently? Will we evolve it in parallel with Europe? I don't know. How will we diverge? Can we go backwards? Possibly not. These are all things that are going to happen at some point in the future. Somebody is going to make decisions, probably not me, somebody with greater decision power making. But yeah, it's going to change at some point. We just need to keep our eyes open and see what is going to actually happen. We have suppliers that affected border controls due to Brexit. You know, is that going to affect how we move forwards with how we do things? I don't know. Will there be reduced international collaboration? There is collaboration in risk assessment and things like that, but I don't know how Brexit is and how that's going to change. I mean, obviously there is interchange of ideas through the educational and the professional bodies. So there's things like Nicole and such like that are out there, but you know, it's an unknown, just something to be aware of. We have, you know, there's you know, lab testing methodologies. Recently, I've seen something published by Has Waste Online, which was quite a useful list of acronyms covering, and I've used TPH there, I apologize, I should have said hydrocarbons, trying to differentiate between all the different descriptions of what hydrocarbons can be. It's quite easy to say TPH, as I just did there, and that might not be exactly what you meant. Did you mean mineral oils? Did you mean particular sort of carbon banding? I don't know. Do you know? Does the person who specifies the test know? I mean, that's important. There's also things like the lab testing that's done for loss on ignition and WAC testing for waste classification. It's, you know, these tests change and there is guidance sent to the labs. Do we know what we're specifying? You know, how are we aware of the changes? So, you know, really we need to keep checking and making sure that we know that we're actually getting what we think we're getting. And I am sort of drawing towards the end. I've done a whistle stop tour, really. Where there's muck, there's brass. And if you don't get the muck bit right, I suspect that in the future we're going to be standing in the dock and looking at prosecution. Certainly, there is lots of warning noises coming out from the Environment Agency. That the waste liabilities is criminal. It's under criminal law, which means the guilty parties are potentially going to go to prison if found guilty, which is not a great thought. The liability is joint and several, so it encompasses probably nearly all of the people on this course that who look at or advise on waste. It's a bit of a sobering thought for sort of 7:45 approximately on a Wednesday evening. But, you know, looking forwards, is this what we're going to be seeing? I've heard said that version 3 of the DOCOP is anticipated in 2021. I don't know what the changes are going to be, but there's probably some, otherwise it wouldn't be issued. But it is very unlikely that the hoped for option of reusing made ground off-site with appropriate risk assessments, etc., is not going to be in there. Too much of a big step, especially as I understand there's been a significant amount of misuse of the DOCOP version 2. So whilst that's being misused, they're not going to give us any more rain, in case, you know, you give an inch and everybody takes a mile. So sadly, I don't think that's going to happen. The joint unit for waste crime is out there. You know, it's been built up. There is you know, a task force that's out there that's aiming to enforce the waste legislation. And those of you involved in waste hopefully will be aware that it's not just the Environment Agency, but Mr. Taxman's involved. And you know, I can remember historically, you know, parents saying it's rather like, you know, if you're in the army, it's get caught by the civvy police and not the military police. You really don't want to be caught by the taxman, because not only will there end up potentially with the prosecution, but the penalties the taxman can impose are fairly draconian and can take a fairly minor waste crime into something that's significantly expensive and punitive. So and I may be wrong, but I haven't seen sort of a flagship construction waste prosecution or published yet. And it may have gone under my radar, and I apologize if that's the case. But if there is, I'd love it if somebody could tell me so I can look at it. But I think when we see something like that come forward, it will start to hit home how important it is that we actually get waste management right. So looking forwards, we can expect tighter enforcement of the regulations. And the recent waste conference, I think the message that came out was plan, 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 plan. And when you think you've planned it, check it and plan it again, for all of your materials reused, and do it as soon as you possibly can. That way you stand a chance of being ahead of the game and not stepping the wrong side of the law. So a quick summary, whistle-stop tour of some of the issues that I see, you know, affecting the contaminated land community into next year, and possibly quite a long way beyond. It's not an exhaustive list. I don't claim to know everything that's going on. I've really just plucked the ideas that I think are probably, and I hope, are the most pertinent. We need to keep checking, we need to stay up to date. And those of you that are thinking, you know, well, where do I find out about any of these things? Good places to start would be the CLARE website, the guidance that's published by the AGS, and the sort of the news publications that come through the likes of Environment Analyst, which, you know, encompasses what used to be the old Brownfield briefing. So I've really come to the end of my ideas. And I'd just like to thank you for hanging on in there and listening to me ramble and raise a whole load of questions. And you know, if you have any questions or any thoughts or ideas that you might want to raise to all the people on this webinar, now's your opportunity. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Jo. That was very insightful, especially about the changes afoot and where to go to look for more information on certain topics. That was really, really good. As I said earlier, if you have questions, if you pop them into the Zoom chat, I think the first one that's got in there is from Mike Jones. He says, interested in the remediation techniques applied at contaminated land sites consultation. How do people get involved in the consultation process? Is it too late?
I don't think it's too late. I think it's still running. I've picked up on it through JISC Mail and Mike Smith, who pulls together the guidance through the ground forum, and his summary reports are available on the CLARE website under the ground forum area within the CLARE website. That's probably the best place to get there. Or, you know, oh, somebody's posted how to do it.
I've just noticed.
Somebody's posted how to do it. You know, I've got a copy of the document through Mike, and the comments are to go back to Jessie Matthew at BSI.
Very good.
Yeah,
it's always nice when you've got colleagues of a like-minded information set on the line.
Yes. Right, when you've got a keyboard warrior that's able to do the typing while you're talking. Thank you.
We've got an email from a message from Sheila Peacock. She says, how do you see the contamination community coping with increased hazard of wildfires, of windblown dust contamination during hot, dry summers due to climate change?
It's a good question, isn't it? I think if you're based in Australia or possibly America, Canada, you're going to be, that's probably something that's very high up on your agenda at the moment. I think the guys that specialized in air pollution and deposition of dusts and things will come to the fore. It will be something possibly that we need to start looking at. I think it's unlikely to happen terribly much in our urban areas because I don't think we have the sort of ecology where we're going to get wildfires or coming through London but we do have heathland in Surrey and places like that. So, you know, we're not probably, and I seem to remember, was it last year, Frensham Common had quite a large fire on it, which is not very far from me, sitting here in dark and dank Hazelmere. So yeah, I think possibly that's a really good question. We may need to be looking at some sites where there may be, you know, deposition of ash and other sort of combustion products on the ground where there's been somewhere nearby, you know, forest fire or heath fire. I think we probably need to look at it in context, and if you do a good desk study and you identify whether there's an area of that sort of risk, although how far those clouds could travel, I'm not a meteorologist, so I don't know. Yeah, good question. Like another point to be thinking about.
Fabulous. Andy D has a comment, not so much a question. Worth mentioning up and coming Syria guidance on sustainable management of surplus soils, which will hopefully promote and simplify the waste regulation process and lead to greater opportunities to sustainable use surplus site soils. And then there's a hyperlink if anyone's interested.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, as I said, I don't claim to have managed to trawl everything into the short talk this evening, and that is equally relevant.
Are there any other questions for Joe? Very quiet. No chat.
Well, as I say, I think I've asked more questions than I've answered, or raised more questions than I've answered.
That's the joy of having to look to the future, isn't it? It's always full of questions.
Yeah, it's been very much sort of the more you know, the more you read, the less you realize you know.
That's a very true point.
And unfortunately, I've been around quite a few years to think about all the things I don't know.
Any other questions?
Do you think that net zero target will stimulate landfill mining? I'd like to hope it would. Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be a really good outcome. You know, great. I'm all for landfill mining. You know, we can't keep shoving waste into the ground and covering it up, and we're running out of holes in which to put waste. Even with recycling, and some of the older landfills, we put stuff in it that was potentially quite valuable. So yeah, how it would actually be measured towards the net zero target, and who would measure that, I guess that would probably be up to sort of the waste operators and how they operate and do their bit towards net zero. But I would like to hope so. I think that would be a good positive outcome. So there's another question. Any insights on new and novel contaminated groundwater that are developing, perhaps those for emerging contaminants? Yeah, actually, no, I don't have any at the moment. And I did think about it, you know, what remediation techniques are out there that we could use. But unfortunately, I ran out of time to talk to various remediation contractors to try and get an insight as to what they're looking at the moment and whether they are looking towards these emerging contaminants. I think certainly I've seen that the likes of Regenesis now have remediation technologies that will deal with the likes of PFOS and PFOA. I don't know whether they're looking at, or whether anyone is looking at how to remediate microplastics. But yes, I think that the specialist remediation contractors will be starting to think about how they can be ahead of this particular game.
Right. I think, are there any more questions? If not, I will probably let Jo disappear because I know Jo has double booked her webinars this evening. So we're very grateful that she chose us first. So thank you very much, Jo.
Yeah, I'd committed to this one. Only paid for the other one.
Yeah. What I'd like to do before Jo disappears, if everyone could unmute themselves and just give Jo a little round of applause. And thank you again for coming to talk to us. That'd be great. I will start the clap.
Yay! Whoop, 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 whoop.
Jolly good. Well done.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank
well
you.
done.
Thanks,
Thank
Joe.
you for your patience.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jo. I will stop recording this section as we move into the AGM because I don't think anyone wants to watch that on YouTube, to be honest.
All right.
But
Do you want to take the? Thank you, everybody. I'm going to hand back to Vicky to start running the